Hello, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine, Content Specialist for the Florida Joint Center for Citizenship, which is part of the School of Politics, Security, and International Affairs at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Welcome to our Middle School Civics Highlight Series. Today we focus our attention on Benchmark 3.13, Explain Government Obligations to its Citizens and the Services Provided at the local, state, and national levels. In Part 2, we focus on comparing the powers and obligations of local, state, and national governments. In Benchmark Clarification 2, students will compare the powers and obligations of local, state, and national governments. And we ask in what ways those powers are similar to or different from one another. What are national government obligations? National government obligations are outlined in Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution, in which the national government has certain obligations and must provide certain services equally to all citizens, regardless of which state that they live in. So, for example, Article 1, Section 8 includes 18 clauses, and many of those 18 clauses focus on the obligations that the national government has to the people, and in some respects, the obligations that the people have to the national government. So, for example, the national government provides for an army and a navy, and the national government has the power to declare war. These are powers that the national government has that affect everyone. One part of the country doesn't go to war while another part of the country is at peace, for example. If there is some kind of a natural disaster, such as a flood or a hurricane, members of the National Guard go to that state or that area of the country, and that means that even though one area of the country is a focus at a particular time, doesn't mean that another area of the country would also not then be served by the National Guard if they experienced some kind of an emergency or some other kind of event that requires national intervention. At the same time, the national government is obligated to collect taxes, which we are then obligated to pay regardless of where we live in the country. So there is a national income tax, and we are obligated to pay that tax. The national government provides for the common defense and does other things to help you as citizens. We also have equal access to government services, which might include health care, student loans, and helping the poor. So, for example, there is a Medicare program which provides medical care for the elderly, and regardless of which state that a person lives in, if they are 65 and over, they are entitled to access Medicare services. Similarly, if a person is poor and medically needy, there is a Medicaid program that's also at the national level that's distributed to people regardless of where they live in the country. Article 1, Section 8 includes what is called either expressed or enumerated powers. What this means is that these are powers that are listed. They are specified and they are listed. These are powers that are given only to the national government, and these powers include declaration of war, the power to regulate immigration, and the power to regulate trade, as well as to include the requirements for naturalization. So if a person comes into this country, there are laws as to what would be required of them if they were not already a U.S. citizen. They might be born outside the United States and still be a U.S. citizen, for example, if they had a U.S. citizen parent. But if a person is not born a U.S. citizen and wants to become a U.S. citizen, the Congress sets out those laws for citizenship, and they apply equally to all people who are seeking citizenship in terms of the opportunities to secure citizenship, what the requirements are, etc. What about state government obligations? The states have certain obligations and must provide certain services equally to all citizens of that state. Each state constitution describes these services and obligations. And the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution says that if there is not a power that is specifically given or delegated to the national government, those powers are reserved or set aside for the states. This means that the national government has a limited number of powers. Some of those powers provide services and fulfill obligations, but the powers to the states are unlimited unless, of course, the national government decides that those powers belong to them. And that has been, as you could imagine, something of a conflict at times between the national and the state governments. The states have interpreted the 10th Amendment to mean that they are in charge of providing various services such as public education, public safety, law enforcement, and certain, but not all, health services. State governments also have the power to set up local governments, which play an important role in the lives of citizens. So state government serves as a link between the people and government in terms of accessing services, but the state government also serves as a link between the national government and the local government, as well as to who performs and fulfills these obligations and services. What about local government obligations? Local governments also have certain obligations, and they must provide services equally to the citizens who live in their area. Local governments are the closest to the people and provide the most services on a regular basis. So even though we may know the least about our local government, we may not know who our mayor is, who our city or county commissioners are. We don't know when they meet. We wouldn't recognize the mayor or a county commissioner if we saw them on the street. Nonetheless, it is the local governments that are closest to the people and provide the most services on a regular basis. These local services include schools, water, sewage, road repairs, emergency and medical services, public cemeteries, airports, harbors, and parks. One of the most important services of any local government is law enforcement, which includes city police officers and county sheriff's deputies. And so we do see that these local governments, they have so much that they're responsible for giving us, but at the same time, we know the least about them. Now, there's also this concept of concurrent powers. Concurrent powers are those powers that are shared between the national and state governments. Some powers are concurrent because the United States has a national system, and consequently, that system of government is a shared system. So a national government doesn't mean only the national government provides services or has specific powers. Concurrent powers include, but are not limited to, the power to collect taxes, borrow money, make laws, and create and repair roads and highways. The information graphic that appears on this screen may be very helpful in identifying the differences between national government powers. Those are the enumerated or expressed powers that belong only to the national government. You can see that listing on the left side in the blue. You can also see examples of delegated powers, those powers that are delegated to the national government and thus are not allowed to the state governments. On the right side, you see evidence of reserved powers. Those are powers that only the state governments have and are not given to the national government. One of the ways that I tell the difference between the national government powers and the state government powers, I remember that state government powers are reserved powers. That's in the language of the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and the word reserved has an S in it. So that's an easy way for me to remember the difference between delegated powers, which are national powers, and reserved powers, state powers. But we also have, you can see in the middle that the blue circle and the pink circle sort of overlap in the middle. And this is where we see evidence of concurrent or shared powers. And as we noted earlier, these shared powers include collecting taxes, regulating banks, establishing and administering a judiciary or the courts, borrowing money, providing for the common good, and making and enforcing laws. So it makes good sense that the states would have these particular powers as well as the national government. So we see a system of concurrent powers, shared powers, and we have our delegated powers, which are the national government, and our reserved powers, which belong to the state government. Thank you for joining me for Middle School Civics Highlights. Do you still have questions? If so, please contact us using the information that appears on the screen. Till next time, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine. Thank you for joining me.